Okay, I am here with Abdullah Samir. Abdullah, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so lots to talk about today, but let's get started from sort of the beginning because from I've heard a couple of your conversations on Video Vids' channel and your own story on your channel, and one of the things that I find so fascinating about your story is that you were quite devout yourself. You were a very devout, you're a very devout person. I think you converted to Sunni Islam from Ismaili, if I'm not wrong.
hmm
And uh, so and so it's just a very fascinating story for me to be able to hear from you your own words about how you go from being so devout to leaving. So what's that story like?
so yeah, like you were saying, I was born in an Ismaili family. So Ismailis are basically a minority, a sect of the Shia. So from the Sunni and Shia, and then from Shia, there's many sects as well. So Ismailis are like maybe 10 million in the world. There's not a lot of them. And what they believe is they believe in Aga Khan. He's a
Yes.
spiritual leader of all of the Ismailis. They don't pray 5 times a day. They don't usually they don't go for Hajj. They don't have zakat. They have a different thing they pay to Aga Khan. It's a very different, like almost like a different religion.
Oh, wow.
Not to say that it's not Islam, like I don't want to say that, but it's a very different interpretation of Islam.
Do they
Women,
still believe that Muhammad is the last prophet?
yeah, so they don't,
Okay.
so they do believe that Muhammad is the last prophet, but then they believe that just like Shias believe in 12 imams, 12
Mm.
infallible imams, and these imams started from Ali, the cousin of Muhammad, and kept going on from his descendants. They believe that it's not just 12, but it's like 49 or something, like it's continual to this
Oh.
day. And
Oh,
this
wow.
guy, he's a spiritual leader of all the Ismailis. He says he's a descendant of Ali. So that's
Okay.
how it continues. Now, the religion, like I said, is very different. Women don't wear hijab. They don't call them mosques, they call them Jamaat Khanas.
Oh.
They don't face the Kaaba or Mecca, but it's so different. It's just, so when I actually started in high school reading the Quran for the first time, I had a friend who told me, why don't you read the Quran, a Sunni friend. And by the way, my mom was Sunni Muslim, so my
Ah, I
my,
see.
my parents have a kind of atypical relationship because
Yeah.
normally Sunni women don't marry Ismaili men and vice versa. It's not that common, but they did. But we were growing up as Ismaili, even though,
Is it seen as something that's like bad the way like
yeah,
a Shia Sunni marriage would be?
yeah, because Ismailis are even like
Worse. Yeah.
more far removed from Sunni Islam than Shia. Shia Muslims, if you see them, you might think they're Sunni. You can't really tell.
Yeah.
But like an Ismaili, you would know right away because women, they don't wear hijab. They don't pray 5 times a day. They don't even pray the way that like Sunnis and Shias pray.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
totally different prayer that Aga Khan, one of the Aga Khans, made up, right? And Aga Khan actually means king of kings. So
Oh.
this guy's a king of kings. They pay 12.5% of all of the wealth directly to him.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it's a religious tithe, and so a tithe. So basically, this is the religion, and it's a lot of emphasis on being a good person, on doing voluntary work, being a good citizen. I mean, I was born in Aga Khan Hospital in Kenya. I
Oh, wow.
went I went to Aga Khan school. Some of the best medical schools in Pakistan are Aga Khan schools, so I've
Wow.
heard. So there's a lot of like the money they give him, he uses for a lot of good things, but he also has like race horses. He's also a millionaire,
Yeah. Well,
anyways, right?
yeah.
So I don't. So I do believe that the way I see it is a sort of religious scam. I mean, I
Hmm.
unfortunately I feel like all Ismailis are being taken for a ride in a sense because they might believe this guy has some sort of special power to help them, but he's just like anybody else. He doesn't have any power. So when I read the Quran, I started to see discrepancies between what the Quran says and what I was taught. And the biggest thing is the Quran says you're not supposed to worship anyone other than Allah. You only need to pray to Allah. You don't pray to anybody else. But in this religion, you actually pray to Aga Khan. You say Ya Ali, you to Rahim Kar, have mercy on me and bless me with this and that. So there was a discrepancy there, and then so I started to incline towards Sunni Islam, and eventually I converted to Sunni Islam. I started praying 5 times a day. Now my mom was not religious, so it had nothing to do with my parents.
Okay.
My now this is kind of an interesting point I wanted to make.
Mm.
My dad and even my mom, to some extent, are both kind of agnostic. So my dad was probably more influenced by Eastern religion and Hindu philosophy than Islam, because he, even though he believed in God, he used to say things like, "We don't know anything about God. We don't know the nature of God. God is inside all of us." Like, this is like straight up like Hindu philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And I used to think he was like so misguided. He didn't know anything, especially after I converted.
Oh
Because,
yeah.
as a young guy, a young man or young woman who converts to a different religion, suddenly you think you know everything, right?
Yeah. Your
And
convictions are immediately like 5 times stronger.
yeah, exactly. So I was like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How can God be everywhere and inside us and this and that? And so I was like kind of disagreeing with him. And he would say things like, "We don't know what God is." And I would say, "Yeah, but the Quran says God is like this. Don't you agree with that?" And he didn't know what to say, but he didn't agree with like a literal interpretation of the Quran. He wasn't like a religious man, but he
Mm.
was what you would call a spiritual man.
Mm.
So my dad had a huge influence on me in that sense. Even though I converted to like a more fundamentalist, hardline, like religious, orthodox practicing of a religion, he was still very, very, loving to me. He didn't kick me out, anything like that. He was like, whatever way you want to worship God is up to you.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing actually, right? So I started praying 5 times a day. I started reading the Quran regularly. I started going to the mosque. I started going to Islamic conferences. I grew my beard. I still have a beard today, but not for religious reasons. Um, and so what happened was I deep dived into Sunni Islam, and all this time, my dad would say like, just take it with a grain of salt. Just be careful. Don't go too far into this because maybe it's not true, right? And I'm like, no, 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 no. This is the truth. The Quran's the word of God, and I was like convinced that for a fact the Quran is the literal word of Allah. And Allah talked to Muhammad 1400 years ago, and he's been talking to humans from the beginning of time. And I was convinced that the Quran is the proof of Islam. There's no mistakes in the Quran. And I was going around telling people this. I used to have a dawa booth, so we used to give dawa. And what we used to do is we used to give out pamphlets and books and stuff like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, on the weekends I used to go with my friends. And then what I did, like, so I told you my background is in IT, right?
Sure.
So I'm like, how can I help more people to become Muslim? Because I want everyone to be on Allah's good side. So, Allah, if you think about it, Allah is a kind of scary monster that Muslims are being trapped by. That's how I see
Yeah.
it. And they are telling Muslims, if you don't do this, I'm going to burn you alive forever. I'm going to burn you. I'm going to burn your kids. I'm going to torture you unless you do what I say. So even though it's not real, to them it's real. And they're trapped by this ideology. And I was one of those people. And so I wanted to help as many people as possible to be on, I didn't see him as a monster, but to be on this monster's good side. Okay. And
You did you still feel afraid of,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I,
Yeah.
I believed, I was scared of Allah, and I wanted people to be in Allah's blessing, not in his anger, right? Because Quran says
Right.
that Allah gets angry and stuff, right?
Right.
So I wanted people to be loved by God, and I wanted to help them to see Islam as true. I saw it as, we are, as the word Abdullah means slave. So we are slaves
Mm.
of God, whether we like it or not. And we have to do what he said or else. So I
Right.
was convinced that I have to help people. So I made a website called lightuponlight.com. It was a big website at the time. It was something that I think, if I can just quickly tell you, I think it had
Sure.
like over some 10 million downloads or something like
Oh
that.
wow.
Yeah, at the time it was like, hold on a second. Let me show you. Here we go. Okay, so what I did was I decided to keep the website up,
Right.
and I added a little note on it that says, "Dear brothers and sisters, after running this website for many years, I have left
Oh
Islam
wow,
to like
that's
read more."
crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it actually had this was before YouTube days, so like 2.6 million downloads. So if
Holy
you click
crap, that's crazy.
Yeah, so if you click on that, I explain like my whole story, why I left Islam and
Wow.
why I made light upon light. Yeah, so that was something I did just to help the ummah
Right.
to make the world a better place, I thought. And the other big website I built was called verse-by-verse-Quran.com, which in Ramadan was getting more than 2,000 people a second downloading from it.
Wow,
So
that's crazy.
yeah. And so these two big websites were something that they were like my contribution to the world of Islam. And so this is what I did. And at the same time, I didn't put my name anywhere on these websites. You won't find my name anywhere on either one of them because I didn't want credit for it. But then eventually what happened was, to fast forward, I left Islam. Now, how did I leave Islam? What happened, right? Well, what happened was in 2015, so almost 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago it started.
Mm.
I was discussing with someone online. So this shows you that sometimes if people are open-minded, you can actually convince them by having conversations. Now, you don't convince them by obviously like telling them you're wrong,
Yeah, or
but
shouting at them or shouting them down.
exactly. But by having like a fair conversation, right? And that's why, like, I'm sure you're doing what you're doing because you want to make a change and you want people to benefit from these dialogues, right?
Yeah, that's
So
exactly right.
so that's exactly what I wanted to do. So this one guy told me that, oh, the Quran, it has he said he was a Christian, he was a white guy, a Christian guy that was wanted to convert to Islam. He almost did, and then
Mm.
he decided not to because he said he found out something about it, right? And so I'm like, well, what happened? Like, I was talking on Facebook with this guy, and he's like, oh, I found out the stories in the Quran were copied from Jewish folk tales. And I was like, what? I'm like, no, no, no. I said, actually, the stories in the Quran come from revelation of God to the Jewish people, not folk tales, right?
Right.
It's like, no, 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 no. He's like, look into it. He's like, just look into the details of what I'm saying. And I looked into it, and I found out that a lot of the stories in the Quran have come not from the Torah, the revelation, so-called revelation to
Mm.
Moses, but the Talmud, which are like the folk tales of the Jewish rabbis. So they used to tell these stories to give lessons. Like, there's this like the mother goose kind of stories, right?
Mm.
But with prophets instead of like the duck and the turtle
Right.
and the horse or whatever, right? The hare and the tortoise or whatever, right? Or the boy who cried wolf. They're like
Right.
these religious myths that actually have been spread in order to teach people lessons, like religious values, right? So then I'm like, oh my God, this is like disturbing. And then I started to look into a few more things. I found the issue of Dhul Qarnayn in the Quran, which apparently there's this Gog and Magog, which is like hiding somewhere beyond these two gates, beyond this giant gate. And then I'm like, well, where's Gog and Magog? Like,
Mm.
where's Yajuj and Majuj? There's nowhere on the earth have we seen any giant gate that's keeping people trapped, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I'm like, well, there must be. So there's a problem here. What do I do? Because I actually believe this was true, and now I have a dilemma. I am seeing some facts that disagree with my worldview. So either I can throw out the facts, or I can change my worldview to match the facts, right? So what I did was I changed my worldview to match. No, no, I actually changed the facts to
To
keep my
match your world.
worldview. Yeah, to keep my worldview. So what I did was I found a way to make sense of it. Somebody sent me a video. My wife said, speak to. My wife was Muslim at the time too. We were both Muslim. She also converted to Islam, by the way, from Christianity.
Oh wow.
So before she met me, yeah. So she was like, and she was like hijab wearing, and she was also very religious, right? And so she said, talk to your friends. And I talked to my friends, and one guy gave me this video that said, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the under the earth, maybe the this. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to put this aside. I'm just going to believe in Islam.
Yeah.
So for one more year, I continued being Muslim. And then the next year, same thing happened to me. Again, a doubt came up to me. This time it came from the mosque. I was in the mosque. The imam was reading something just before breaking the fast. So I was fasting. And he said, these scientists, they think they're so smart, but actually Allah knows best. He says in the Quran that Allah holds up the sky and this and that. And I was like, oh my God, this is again trouble for me.
Yeah.
Because I had so one of my weaknesses is, and this is a weakness I think for many people that keeps them held up into religious mythology, is that I wasn't scientifically literate. And but because I was in IT, I used to read a lot, and I used to
Mm.
be and I was a very open-minded guy. So as I started to learn more about science, I started to see the Quran was kind of like, it was hard, it was getting a little bit more difficult to understand
Mm.
because the Quran makes a lot of sense if you look at it from a perspective of a 7th century man. But like in the modern world, now how do you make sense of Allah saying he holds up the sky?
Yeah.
Like what's to hold up? There's nothing to hold up, right? And he says he keeps it from falling on you. Like what? It's not solid. But if you think about back then, they used to think it was solid.
Yeah.
And another thing is, there's a verse in the Quran that says the sun and the moon go in an orbit. Now, Muslims have said, yeah, this is talking about the orbit of the sun around the Milky Way, which is 300 million year orbit. And I'm like, but it says sun and moon go in orbit and then talks about night and day.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Is it really talking about 300 million year orbit that nobody knew about, that was
Right.
meaningless to humanity? So this is a type of example of how now, so many people have different reasons they leave Islam. Some people say, I didn't like the morality, like the slavery and the beating your wife is allowed and you can have 4 wives. So they have issues with the morality, right?
Morality.
But for me, it wasn't that. It was science. Science made me see that this book doesn't have anything in it, not even one thing that Muhammad couldn't have known. And so when that happened, my faith was completely shattered. And then I started to speak about it. So, but that's basically what happened.
So it was a relatively sudden process for you. It was like a getting sort of hit by a freight train of science, kind of, right?
Yeah, it was actually pretty all of a sudden because, again, like you said, some people they have this gradual
Right.
process, but for me, it was like, no, this is true, but okay, what about this? Oh,
Hmm.
and I'm like, I gotta be honest to myself. Either it's true or it's not true. There's no in between. So
Right.
I couldn't do what some people do, and that's part of my personality too. That you have some people which I don't understand this, but like they are Muslim, they believe the Quran is the word of God, yet they don't practice the religion, which to me confuses me because, well, if you're gonna go to hell, you either do it or you don't believe it. Like I don't understand
Yeah.
how you can say I believe it, but I don't care. I'm not gonna pray. It doesn't make sense.
That is interesting, isn't it?
But majority of Muslims are like that. Like the vast majority of Muslims, they just don't care about the religion. It's just like a cultural thing. Once in a while, if you insult Muhammad, sometimes they'll become very, very offended. But
Yeah.
like in day-to-day life, they don't pray, they don't fast. The only thing they do is eat halal meat. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It is. That is something interesting that I didn't really think too much about. Like believing that that is the word of God, but not sort of living it to the letter. Because if you're not living it to the letter, then you're going to end up where the kuffars are going to end up as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting one.
So Islamic
How do you think
theology,
they sort of reconcile that?
I think a lot of them, what they say is Allah is most merciful, so
I
he'll
see.
forgive me and he'll let me off with these things. Whereas I would say, well, did you read the Quran? No, it's not like that. Yes, he's merciful, but you have to make some effort too, right? And then he'll be merciful, right? So it was one of those type of things where I guess not everyone takes the Quran literally per se, because there are Muslims, especially nowadays, especially among the Sufi community, that I think are trying to reform Islam. And they don't call it reform, but like they see the Quran as, actually, let's step back. They see
Sure.
Islam as being, there's basically 4 principles or 5 principles, goals of Sharia, which are to preserve life, to preserve lineage, to preserve what else is there? Wealth, basically like that. So they say, like for example, Hamza Yusuf and Bin Baya are good examples of this, right? They actually say that if the rules of Islam um, are actually getting in the way of this, then you don't need those laws anymore. So, for example,
Interesting.
yeah. So let me just give you an example of this,
Sure.
which is kind of surprising. Many people are surprised when they see this. That Ben Baya, who is the sheikh of Hamza Yusuf, and Hamza Yusuf is a famous scholar, he's
Hmm.
actually saying that we do not want apostasy laws anymore.
Wow.
We do not want even killing adulterers. We do not want to kill apostates. We do not want to chop off the hands of thieves. So,
Wow.
so basically, the whole category of Islamic law called hudud punishments, these guys are not saying Islam is bad. They're saying Islam is good, but Islam as, it doesn't need this anymore because it's causing more harm than benefit. So
Right.
that was for that time, but in today's time, we don't want it anymore. So there is scholars actually that don't take it literally, because you said, you know, how do they reconcile, like, the letter of the law? So they don't take the letter of the law, but they take the spirit of the law.
I see. I see what
And
you're
and
saying.
in that sense, but then you have the group that I belong to, which was Salafis, which would say those guys are completely misguided. They're
Right.
wrong. They're changing Allah's word. They're like they're doing the opposite of what we need. We want Sharia law. We want to chop off hands. Not that we want to chop off hands, but the laws of Sharia are good for society. So it's actually good to stone people who cheat on their wives. It's good.
Right.
So I was one of those people that would probably argue that it's a good thing, and
Right.
because it'll keep marriages intact or whatever. But those other side of the community now, which I'm very happy for, are saying no, we don't need this. Islam is compatible with democracy, and this is the type of Islam that I think is much better for the world than obviously Salafism, Islamism, the very hard line, black and white view of Islam, which leads to terrorist activities, right?
So do you
Eventually.
think that if you start sort of overturning or modifying certain basic fundamental principles of Islam, then down the road, because this is a question that comes from Sona Parivraj as well, and then we sort of come to there's two schools of thought within sort of the ex-Muslim or secular voices in Islam. Is one school of thought is from the sort of Armin Nawabi school of thought, which is that Islam just needs to go. Then another school of thought is somebody like Majid Nawaz that says that Islam needs reform. But the question becomes that when you start reforming Islam, that means you will need to reform some of the basic fundamentals of Islam, which inhibits Islam from sort of becoming, or Islamic society from becoming, a free thinking, free speaking society. So if you modify Islam to an extent where you're reforming or modifying some of the basic tenets of Islam, then is it even Islam at that point?
So I this is actually a very good question, because I used to, especially coming from the Salafi perspective, I used to think that Islam cannot be reformed, and that it's not actually possible to change Islam, and that a lot of people think that Islam is somehow uniquely different than other religions, in the sense that it can't be reformed, because the Quran says that whoever, basic Quran says that, you know, today I perfected your religion. So it's perfect.
Yes.
But the thing is, what I am seeing with my own eyes is that Islam is being reformed. So I did not go into some progressive Islam. I left
Right.
Islam.
Right.
I
Right.
was
Right.
not like Islam allows homosexuality.
Right.
I never said that. And I don't believe that. And I've looked at the arguments of progressive Muslims, and sorry to say, even though they are my allies, I don't know how to reconcile
Right.
homosexuality with Islam. It's not possible, in my opinion. It's very, very difficult. Even if you throw out all of the hadith, which is slowly getting thrown out day by day, you still have the problem of the Quran is pretty straightforward and pretty explicit that homosexuality is not allowed, through the
Right.
story of Lot. And so they try to reinterpret in a different way, but it's not a good argument. It's not a strong argument. However, what I am seeing is that Muslims, not just progressive Muslims, but actual Orthodox Muslims, are actually reforming Islam. And if I can just share something with you.
Sure. Sure.
So I have this post I made on reforming Islam, where what happened was Dina Tokyo, who is a famous hijabi Instagrammer,
Mm.
she posted a guest post on her blog. She has 1 million+ subscribers, and she's
Wow.
famous for being a hijabi Instagrammer, even though she's kind of upset. She's not wearing hijab anymore or something like that.
Oh
And
wow.
and so she had this article that said that why can't Muslim women marry non-Muslim men? This is
Mm.
not allowed. So, for example, even in my own life,
Mm.
I had this problem because I left Islam and my wife was still Muslim.
Oh
So
wow.
now, what is she supposed to do with me?
Oh,
Technically,
that's crazy. Yeah.
she has to break up with me.
Oh
And,
wow.
and my wife actually had Muslim women tell her, "We will support you if you leave him."
That's insane,
With
man.
5 kids, we have 5 kids,
Yeah,
and
that's
they're telling
insane.
her, "You should leave him for the kids," which is again beyond stupid. Because, by
Yeah.
the way, I'm still gonna be in their lives.
Yeah.
sorry, but I'm gonna be seeing my kids all the time, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
raise them with what I think is true. And good luck, telling. Especially, I'm lucky in the sense that my kids are quite young,
Yeah.
so they are as open-minded as you can get. Because
Yes.
what I've seen is people that have adult Muslim kids, like it's much harder to convince them because they're
I'd
adults
imagine.
now, right?
Yeah.
But kids, they're like, man, they're open-minded.
Yeah.
They're
That's
not
an open book
dogmatic.
right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talk to my kids, and my kids, I don't try to convince them there's no God or whatever, but they can see like the conversations I had with my wife. And I honestly, I don't even care if they want to believe in God, but I just want them to have good life. I
Yeah.
want them to have a good life. So, but what I wanted to tell you is that Muslims are like pushing back, and things that used to be taken for granted that you couldn't do before are now changing. But they don't call it reform. They don't want to call
Mm,
it reform. But things that used to be kind of like unacceptable before, they're now becoming acceptable, especially among the Sufi Muslim community.
sure.
They don't see it again. And these are like actual Orthodox Muslim scholars. I'm not talking about progressive Muslims. Progressive Muslims, nobody cares about them. They're just ignored. But the actual Orthodox scholars are reforming Islam. And I told you what they're saying. I'll give you an example of how they do this. What they say is, and a good example of this is Mufti Abu Layth. What he says is that it's called trajectory hermeneutics. So what they
Okay.
say is, look at Prophet Muhammad. He actually didn't forbid slavery, but he encouraged freeing slaves. So what's the goal? The goal is to get rid of slavery. So therefore, slavery is haram now. So because the
Ah,
goal is to improve society. Now, I don't buy this
yeah.
because he could have forbidden slavery.
I understand that.
He
Yeah.
could have just said no more slavery,
Yeah.
done. Like he did that with interest or riba. He said no more interest, no more usury. As of this day, whoever has any money owed, it's forgiven, it's cancelled, done. So he could have done it, but let's just humor them. They're saying to Muslims, look, Muhammad was trying to get rid of slavery, so take that trajectory forward, trajectory hermeneutics, we will eventually get rid of slavery. And the Muslims, well, other than ISIS who brought it back, humanity in general has kind of got rid of slavery. Like we definitely don't allow slavery anymore, right?
Right.
At least not open slavery. I mean,
Right.
you can say in Dubai and Qatar and stuff, they still use a lot of Indians, and they treat them like slaves, and they trap them with the visa system and
Yep.
Filipinos, and that's still happening. But nobody says that's okay. Like we all
Yeah.
say that's bad. So that's that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is an interesting one because you have these people that are basically saying that, okay, what you have read for so long is actually, or what you have understood for so long isn't actually what Muhammad was saying. What Muhammad was saying was this new interpretation that now we're giving it to you was actually what Muhammad was saying.
Well, not exactly
And
like that, but
okay,
they're saying that at that time and at that place, that sort of understanding was fine. But
I see.
today,
I
we
see.
would not like another example is child marriage.
Mm,
Most Muslims will say it's completely wrong
wrong.
for like a 9-year-old child to be married to like a 50-year-old or whatever. But they will not say it was wrong for Muhammad because at that time and place, child marriage was common or whatever. But today it's wrong because, we don't have those situations anymore that people die in war at 35, right? So we can't do that anymore. So they will say again, look at the trajectory. They won't say necessarily that Muhammad was not saying that people didn't understand him correctly, but they were
Mm,
saying that it wasn't, it's context. They're saying it's context.
I see.
And again, just to make it clear, I don't think this is a great argument, but I do support this for Muslims to
Yeah,
bring
because I
Islam
do think
into.
you're going to run into stumbling blocks at the end of the day. The more you sort of
Mm.
start exploring, the more you sort of start being like, okay, we don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. And then eventually you're going to come to a point where you're going to reach like a very fundamental, principle of Islam. And you're going to be like, oh, crap, what do we do now? Do we say we don't need this anymore? Or if we say we don't need this anymore, does that fundamentally change Islam? You know what I mean? So I
Yep.
feel like it's going to be very interesting to see when sort of Islamic reformists reach that point where they're like, oh crap, what do we do now? Do we say we don't need this anymore, or do we just, that's going to be
What's
a very interesting point.
what's the red line,
Yeah,
right? Like
what's the red line?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question. I have the same question because honestly, I don't know. I don't know. Like what praying 5 times a day, can we get rid of that? I
Mm,
don't know. Like eating halal meat, I don't know. Right? It's a good question.
yeah.
There's quite a few things in there that some people will say no, you can never change that. Some people will say like, so that'll be interesting to see what happens, right?
The biggest one that you see, that, being a Hindu, being from the civilization that I belong to, there's a particular sort of dislike that you see among Islamic literature for people like that, for quote unquote sort of idol worshippers. They tend to be the worst of the worst usually. And so even when you look at, and again, before I go on to this point, I think one thing needs to be discussed really quickly as well, is because a lot of people, and we were talking about this, Abdullah, just before we went live as well, that I think the problem that happens in a lot of cases, in a lot of places, when people are criticizing Islam or Islamic society or Islamic principles, often the mistake they make, in my opinion, is that they turn their polemic or they turn their criticism away from Islam and onto Muslims, which I think is a massive mistake, in my opinion, because when you're criticizing Islam, where you're criticizing an ideology that some guy back in the day came up with and said, hey man, follow this. So ideologies are being proved wrong every single day in this new millennium. We're learning information at a pace that we never learned before in the history of humankind. So ideologies are like this are going to keep falling by the wayside. We need to make sure that we're not pointing our fingers at people, rather pointing our fingers at ideas, because people are people. You are a person, I am a person, some other dude sitting somewhere, in Iraq or Iran is a person. They're just, it's like they're just a computer with, it's like bashing a computer because you don't like OS. Just get rid of Apple software, man. That's, it's kind of like that. So I think it's important to make that point. And I think in Hindu academia and Hindu intelligentsia, because Hindu intelligentsia has been trying to make a case sort of against Islamic ideology, for which I believe there is a case, what they've done in order, sometimes inadvertently, they've made the mistake of being like, okay, when we're speaking against Islam, we are also speaking against Muslim. And I think that's wrong. Like when I speak against Islam, I'm not speaking against Muslim. I like Muslims. I talk to a lot of, I grew up in India. India has a crap ton of Muslims. So I had Muslim neighbors. I had Muslims I went to school with. I played football with them. I drank with them. I'm not going to name who because they might get into trouble. But yeah, I drank with them. So, they're just people. And I
Yeah.
think that distinction is very important to make.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you say that. Ex-Muslims, we are actually often used by certain people with agendas to try to promote anti-Muslim bigotry. So,
That's right.
the word Islamophobia is actually a bad word because it conflates the two. Like already people have a hard time differentiating from what you said. And it's not just like I appreciate you saying that this happens among Hindu circles, but it happens among all circles, even well-meaning, not just people that mean badly, but people that mean well. Like for example, Western liberals, they don't necessarily always understand that it's okay to criticize ideology, and that just because like Ben Affleck with Sam Harris on the, like he was like, oh, this is
Yeah, he
racist,
went
right?
full Batman.
Yeah. So like he's coming from a good place. He's trying to say like, how dare you
Yeah.
criticize these people's religion? That's racist or whatever. But like he doesn't get it, like that it's the idea is just an idea, it's just a system, and it just like communism or just like whatever, even
Hmm.
capitalism, like
Hmm.
it's free to be criticized. Like it's not like it doesn't have feelings, it's not going to get hurt. Now Muslims might get upset, Muslims do get upset, and they might even sometimes lash back, but that's okay. Like we're allowed to upset people, but we are not going to like, you're right, and this is very, very important, that we do not want to fear monger, and we have to be careful in how we do things. So we don't want to make it sound like something that's not true, that like all Muslims are like ticking time bombs or something. Like we don't, we're not, that's not what we believe, and I don't believe that either. Because like you, I also grew up among Muslims. Most Muslims, I think, are very easy. Now, I have to say one thing though, like my generally positive experiences with Muslims is growing up in the West.
Yes.
So the difference I find is with ex-Muslims who are in Pakistan or Malaysia, Singapore, they when they're surrounded by Muslims, and even worse, if the law of the land, like Saudi,
That's right.
is against them, they're not like they're not so happy about Muslims like I am. Like, so
Yeah.
the experiences are very different based on where you live in the world.
But at the same time, I completely agree with you there. But at the same time, I feel like it's again, it's the ideology and the weight of that ideology under which these people live and exist. Everything about them or everything about their societies has been formed in such a way so as to reinforce that ideology and to remove any sort of implements or any sort of tools that could question or change that ideology or challenge that ideology. So they're just stuck in this vicious loop of just anger and anger and anger and more anger.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. That like I love how maturely and how you look at this from a big picture, because people don't always realize that, I mean, Muslims are victims of Islam too, and especially Muslims in, like, say, Saudi Arabia, or even like my blog is banned in Qatar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Sorry, Emirates, not Qatar, in
I
Emirates.
see.
So like that's like supposed to be a liberal place, right? But they banned my blog. Obviously, I think maybe Pakistan maybe banned it as well. I don't know, but they block websites like Answering Islam, Wiki Islam. My blog is banned as well. Like, one of my videos was banned from Pakistan. Would you marry your adopted son's ex-wife? So I made a
Hmm.
video about like how absurd this rule in the Quran is,
Right.
and it's been banned from Pakistan. So they actually went and banned that one video. Like, eventually the whole channel will get banned. I
Right.
mean, I've been banned on Facebook as well. So multiple times, despite me
Wow.
being trying. Right now, I'm banned on Facebook for like
Oh,
another.
wow.
Yeah. So this is my, I think, third 30-day ban. So
That's
at this
crazy, man.
at this point, I'm gonna get like permanently blocked, and my account's gonna be deleted. I'm serious. Like I know people like his Sultan. He was completely permanently banned from Facebook
Right.
now. So, and I know Apostate Prophet was banned on Twitter. So it's a very sensitive topic, especially in the West, even. And talking about Islam can get you in a lot of trouble. So
Hmm.
it's kind of unfortunate, especially if you're not intending to like cause any sort of bigotry towards people. I mean, the important thing to do is always to just emphasize that, like you said, that you cannot just generalize and assume that every Muslim is the same, or every Hindu is the same, or every atheist, or whatever. Like, everybody's different. So you need to talk to people and ask them, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Right? I mean, that's basically what you have to do to get to the conclusion of like what to think about this person, right?
Yeah, and I feel like, you're talking about, okay, we need to change Muslims' mind, or no, not you, but I'm just saying that people in general. A lot of people say that we need to change Muslim minds about these things. So I was just going to make the point before we went into this that in terms of the way many Muslims think, or Islam treats people from my culture that they see as idol worshippers, which is among the worst of the worst. And so you see within Pakistan there's this institutionalized hatred for Hindus. In textbooks they're taught this. In their legal system is very dicey on sort of rights for Hindus and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, okay, you're talking about, okay, you have to change Muslims' minds about how they view Hindus, because when I look at a Muslim from India or a Muslim from Pakistan, I literally see them as my people, because that's literally what they are.
Yeah.
So I don't see them as a foreigner, but because Pakistanis, Indians to a lot lesser extent, but Pakistanis to a lot more extent have been conditioned by this. Oh, we're Arabs, which they're not. We came from outside and this and that, and we have this outside ideology. They have this hatred. So if you're trying to change their minds, you're not going to be able to do that by attacking an individual Muslim, grabbing him by the collar and shaking him and being like, "Hey, man,
Yeah.
you got to think the way I think." That's not how you're going to change their mind. You're going to change their mind by questioning this ideology that they keep holding up high on this pedestal, and being like, look, man, is this the right way for the world to exist? Being like, only we who think this way are right, anybody who else who thinks differently is wrong. Is that the way we want to live on this planet in 2019? That's
Yeah.
something that needs to be questioned, and I feel like that's the way to go about it, rather than being like, oh, you Muslim, man, you have, there's a problem with you. I think that's just a more efficient way of going about it.
Yeah, indeed. And you made a very good point as well. that this is actually something that is quite troubling. And can I just share something with you
Sure,
again?
sure.
So I have this made up verse that said, Muslims are the worst creatures on earth. They are deaf, dumb, and blind. They have no sense. They are cursed by Hanuman. They are filthy. So do not let them approach India after this day. So, like, if I just made this up and I said this, like, I would be like slaughtered alive by everybody. Like,
Yep.
how dare you say that, right?
Right.
But like you said, the Quran says just as bad,
Yep.
if not worse. And unfortunately, the Quran doesn't just attack ideology, it attacks
Mm.
people.
Yeah.
Right? It says the disbelievers are this and that, and indeed those who disbelieved among the people of the book. So, by the way, in this case, it's saying the worst of creatures is not just polytheists, but also Christians and Jews.
Yep.
So it's like, I mean, it's like you said, like what do you do with that? Like how do you like shake that away, right? And
Yeah.
I do know people that do try to shake that off, and they come up with the weirdest explanation. They say, no, no, that's talking about the people back then, those polytheists
Yeah.
at Mecca, not the ones today. But like 99% of Muslims don't think that way, and unfortunately, I think it's just a case of like people will have a sort of cognitive dissonance and a dual identity where they will say I'm human first, or I'm Indian, or I'm Canadian, and then I'm Muslim.
Right.
When the Islamic thing comes first, then it causes problems because it is from the theology of Islam that and what happened in early Islam is that we had like brothers killing brothers, fathers killing sons from the same family, because they converted to Islam and they were fighting against the own people, right? So they were
Right.
all killing each other, and the people at that time, the pagans of Arabia, used to say like you are separating brother from sister, and mother from son, and father from wife, and whatever, husband and wife. And they said yes, because faith is thicker than blood. So they
Right.
actually said iman, faith is stronger than this, which is like kind of crazy, because you've just created this new, like, you Islam has kind of got rid of racism, but instead it added this other sort of like belief racism, right? Where my belief is better than your belief, and I'm better than you because of that, and you're going to go to hell forever, and I'm not going to go. And I think one of the most toxic things about Islam is the martyrdom idea,
Right.
right? And I think someone was at, there's a lot of questions people were
There
asking
were.
on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah.
One of the questions had to do with like this basically this idea, right? Like of jihad, or why do Muslims believe in this? And I think one of the reasons this is a problem is because Muslims are taught if you die for the sake of Allah, you will be getting some reward in the next life. And basically the reward you get, it's not necessarily 72 virgins. That's just like whatever. It's that all your sins will be forgiven and you'll go to
Yeah.
paradise in the body of a green bird. So this is kind of like what you get. Now, this means that anybody that has any sort of like reason. Now the question is, what is jihad? Like, what can you call a legitimate jihad? As a Muslim, when I was Muslim, I used to wonder this myself. What's a legitimate jihad? And I used to think that a lot of the jihads that were going on in the world were not legitimate, because the rule is a jihad has to be declared by an amir, by a
Ah,
caliph,
I see.
by a sultan. So the ruler has to say, you people, we are going to a jihad. It cannot just be like me, that I'm going to do jihad. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. In Islamic law, you cannot do that. And some people even say you have to have a state, right? So like,
I see.
so this is kind of like, so I used to think
So,
that.
for example, if let's say, and this comes from Mr. Reese on Twitter,
Mhm.
if let's say Al Qaeda's leader says that I'm declaring jihad, is that co- I just said kosher? Is that look at that? Is that like is that okay for then the followers of Al Qaeda to do? Is that legally
Okay,
sanctioned?
that's a very good question. So anyone who wants to get a better understanding in the mind of a jihadi should read the amazing book called The Way of Strangers by
Hmm.
Graham Wood. He's a journalist for The Atlantic. He has written an amazing book. And as an ex-Muslim, I am saying his book is amazing, because he wrote the book like better than the ex-Muslim could write the book. Like
Oh,
he
wow.
wrote, he got into the mind of jihadis. But just to basically, your question was is it legitimate? Now this is a problem. I belong to a school of thought, like I told you, near the end of my, just before I left Islam, called Salafism, which is basically what people in Saudi Arabia believe, right? Now,
Hmm.
people think the Saudis are for terrorism. The Saudis are all about terrorism because they're spreading this very hard line version of Islam. But one thing that people don't realize is, and I'm saying this as a Salafi, if I just want to share my screen one more time,
Hmm.
Fatwa Online, which is a Saudi website, right? It's a Salafi website. They're as anti-shirk and anti-kufar as possible. They are actually against terrorism because the Saudis and Salafis in general believe that you are not allowed to do jihad without an emir and without a caliphate. Now
I see.
the question is this: why is Al Qaeda not legitimate, or why is ISIS not legitimate? Why? What's the reason? Like
Yeah.
who gets to decide?
Yeah.
There's no answer. There's no
Yeah.
real answer. Who gets to decide? There's no answer. Who gets to decide? So they will say, so this is what happens. People jump from this type of Salafism, usually. There could be Sufis too, but usually they're Salafi. And they jump to jihadi Salafism. And now they're basically called jihadis by the community.
Hmm.
The outcasts now, but why are they wrong? As a Salafi, I don't know how you can say they're wrong because who gets to decide who's a legitimate ruler and who's not? There's no answer to that.
Right.
It's all made up, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So that's what
Yeah.
happens. And so some people will say, yeah, they're legitimate. And most of the community, like 99% of the community will say they're illegitimate. Like ISIS is like, I don't know, 1% of the Muslim community. And there's actually a website called Letter to Baghdadi,
Okay.
where there's like basically like 100 different scholars, or 100, more than 100 scholars that all over the world, they basically signed this thing that
Oh,
said
wow.
that ISIS is illegitimate, right? And we disagree with ISIS. Why? And this is why we disagree with them. And this is mainly, I think, coming from the Sufi community. But even Salafis would agree that ISIS is wrong. Why they're wrong? That's Islamic debate. You guys can debate why they're wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, we know why they're wrong because they're
Yep.
like doing evil things. Like from a humanitarian perspective, it's
Yeah.
clear. But from your religious perspective, you tell me why they're wrong. I don't know because this is part of Islam, right? You're supposed to start an Islamic state. Now, Sufis would say it's less important. Salafis and the Islamists, so the Ikhwani Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Hizb ut-Tahrir, they want to bring an Islamic state back,
Hmm.
but they don't like ISIS. I don't know. You
Like,
guys
yeah,
figure it
what's
out.
going on there, man?
You
Yeah.
guys figure it out, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. That kind of weird dissonance that these people have.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible, and I think it's good that people talk about it. And, especially people like you are able to talk about this openly, because I think that's such a need of the hour to be able to talk about ideas openly. Without necessarily. And when you talk about these ideas openly, I've seen some people comment under your videos being like, "Oh, you're attacking Islam." You're not attacking Islam. Questioning isn't the same thing as attacking. Discussing isn't the same thing as attacking. And I think that's an important distinction that people need to start making. That
I think I am attacking it though.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I think in some cases, like I'll give you an example. Like I have a video that speaks about why stoning adulterers is a bad thing.
Hmm,
In this case, I'm attacking it because I'm saying this is a bad thing in your religion.
hmm,
So you can say no, it's a good thing, and you can either say one of two things. One, it's a good thing because God said it. Then I can't disagree with you because I don't agree that God said it. Or two, you can say it's bad, it's actually good because blah blah blah, it helps society, it does this, it does that, and then we can have a discussion because now
right.
we have a common premise. We're speaking about another better example would be riba. Muslims will say riba, which one form of it is interest, is actually bad for humanity, right? And now if they say it's bad for humanity, not because Allah said it, but because it's actually bad, now we can have a discussion.
Yeah,
We can
because
talk
that's
about it.
something that society decided. People decided.
Yeah, and we can look at it and we can say, well, what's the bad? Why is this so bad? Oh,
Hmm,
because it causes people to have debt. Okay, but why is that? Like, what's the problem there, or what's the issue? And then we can discuss it and we can get into the topic. But if you just say, well, it's because Allah said it, then I can't
hmm.
debate with you. I don't have anything to say to anymore. I'm just like, okay, there's nothing to discuss then. Your
Yeah, that's true.
morality is religious morality, and it actually happened to me once where Islam says riba is worse than like adultery. It's so bad that it's worse than cheating on your wife.
Wow.
Now, I
Okay.
asked this Muslim friend, I said, okay, prove it. Why is it so bad? Why?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, because it causes this and that. I said, well, a lot of people are benefiting from this system because money has a time value. If I lend you money, it's going to come back and it's going to have less value. And
Yeah.
even I'm taking a risk, never mind even the time value of money. I'm risking my money to you. Obviously, in order to compensate for the risk, you need some sort of compensation. Now, what do you think Muhammad really thought about that for
Yeah.
1,400 years? Of course not. So, like, let's discuss it. Let's have these conversations. Let's get some, but we need a common basis, which is, are we talking about actual benefit and harm, or are we just talking about you believe and I believe? In that
Yeah.
case, there's nothing to say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think that's a very good point. And I want to talk to you a little bit about, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. And I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of spirituality as well, because you're talking about, a lot of people that are trying to have reform in Islam to whatever degree. That's debatable. But the people that are trying to do it, a lot of them are from the Sufi traditions. And there's this theory of sort of universal spirituality that existed in the ancient world, where in India, I believe that India still is the civilization that articulates spirituality in the best way. But spirituality is not India's monopoly. India does not have monopoly on spirituality. Spirituality existed in the ancient world sort of pretty uh, you know all over the place. Like the Greeks had it, the Native Americans had it, the Incas had it, the Mayans had it, the Egyptians had it, the Chinese had it. All of them have it in some form or another. And I feel like there, and this is something that somebody like Sam Harris also talks about spirituality without religion, that the spirituality or sort of the journey of exploring yourself or discovering yourself through spirituality is still an important and worthwhile campaign without necessarily having the burden of religion attached to it. And when you look at people like the Sufis, particularly in the Middle Ages during Islam, the reason so many people within the Islamic societies were drawn so much to uh, Sufis, and even in India, there are many Hindus that are drawn to Sufis. There are uh, there are probably, I would argue, probably more Hindus that go to the Dargah Sharif in Ajmer than Muslims. I would argue that, and so there are, and I think they were drawn to that because of the spiritual aspect of the Sufi saints. Now, the problem that happened with these Sufi saints was that even though they tried to explore the spiritual aspect of the cosmos and the universe and the human existence, they were still beholden and they were still subservient to the Islamic principles. So they could do their exploration as much as they want, as long as it did not transgress Islamic principles. So that is why you had somebody like Moinuddin Chishti, who is so loved by the Muslims in India and Pakistan. But at the same time, at the end of the day, he had to draw a line and say that no, 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 I am completely against kuffars. I'm completely against these idol worshippers, and we need to rid the earth of these idol
Oh
worshippers.
my
So
God.
he had to come out and say that. Now, maybe he said it willingly, maybe he said it under duress, or he was afraid that he was going to lose his power and position, in the Islamic world if he said something that was against Islam. So the point that I'm trying to make is, you know, even though Islamic society was, or that part of the world was Islamized, there was still this uh, attraction towards spirituality, or this great attraction that people still have, despite being Islamized for over 1400 years. People have this strong attraction towards the spiritual aspect of it. And do you see what kind of sort of value do you see in spirituality, and
Mm.
spirituality especially that is not burdened by religious dogma?
Hmm. So that's a very good question. Funny thing is, my dad used to say to me that your practice of Islam is not very spiritual. I was like, come on, I pray 5 times a day, Allahu Akbar, bending up, up and down, up and down. He's like, no, no, you need to do meditation, my son. I'm like, we don't need meditation. We have the best way of praying,
Yeah.
right from Angel Gabriel himself. He came down and he showed us how to pray, and we read the Quran, and that's our spirituality, and that's it. And he's like, okay. But like I was like, I realized after the fact that he was right, and that I had a like that is not spirituality, right? And I was just, when you think your religion and your practice is coming right from God,
Yeah.
you can't
How are you
argue
going to question
against that.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't argue against that. But I'm like, I don't need no man-made this and that meditation. But I didn't realize even mine was man-made.
Yeah.
So I do believe that this is something that is a bit of a vacuum. I'd say especially for atheists, right? And ex-Muslims that don't join another religious practice.
Mm.
The world is a very painful place, and this is something that many people have a challenge with. That when they leave Islam, or they're like, well, kind of like, what now? Like, what do I do? Like, how do I deal with my troubles? And how do I deal with my suffering and this and that? And it's something that I was reflecting on even after I left Islam, that when I started to study, I haven't studied Hinduism per se, but I have studied mindfulness, which comes from the
Oh, there we
practice.
go. That was going to be another question. One of the question comes was asking was Subraya Bhatt was asking, have you actually read up about any other philosophies?
Yeah, so it actually blew my mind when I learned about mindfulness, because it's such an interesting concept. Well, first of all, I just want to compare like Islamic kind of, even maybe Christian kind of thought, but especially Islamic thought, is that I'll give you an example. Muhammad said in a hadith, so-called hadith, that whoever restrains his anger, I will give him any of the hurul ain on the day of judgment, which are the
Mm.
beautiful women. Like he gets to choose whichever one he wants. So it's a very infantile like way of like encouraging people. It's like, you do this and you get this, right?
Yeah.
It's very petty, it's very shallow, and it's not really deep. Whereas when you look at it from a perspective of, we have this ego, which is an Eastern way of looking at it, and we need to control our ego and to not allow our ego to take over our mind, or not allow our mind to rule us, not become automatic, right? And not become, to behave mindfully and to behave intentionally, not reacting and, in a way that you get angry and this and that. And I'm like, this is so much better and so much more powerful than just saying, oh, you do this and you get this, or Allah will love you if you forgive people or whatever. Like, you actually do it for yourself. You don't need anyone saying, I'm going to give you this cookie if you do this. You're just like, it's so much, it's such a mind blow when you hear about that and you understand that. And when I studied mindfulness, I bought a book by Eckhart Tolle, who is
Mm.
is a very famous guy, that he's basically a white guy that talks about this, and he made it kind of like easy for a Western audience to understand this. And it's without any of, for the most part, any religious dogma. So there's no belief in anything, but what you're doing is you're just, being mindful. Meditation is one way to achieve it. And I actually tell ex-Muslims this all the time when they ask me, what do I do? What do I look into now? I say, look into mindfulness,
Yeah.
because mindfulness to me has helped me a lot in my life, and it helped me in my relationship. It's helped me with my kids. It's helped me with many things. Like meditation is one way of doing it, and I do think that if people would meditate more, the world would be a much better place. And Ismailis meditate, by the way. That's another reason why my dad was telling me this. Ismailis do meditate as part of the religious practice. So,
Interesting.
so that's one good thing. They have a lot of influence from Hinduism, actually.
Mm. Mm.
Ismailism has influence from Hinduism. They have religious songs they sing as well. They call them ginans.
Oh wow.
So there's definitely the Hindu influence there.
Even in Kashmir, I don't know if you knew this, but the Kashmiri Sufi tradition borrows very heavily from Hinduism, where even in Kashmir, the Sufis, they call their teachers, so who they learn from, they call them gurus.
Oh,
They
yeah,
still
yeah.
call them gurus to this day.
Yeah. And so what you were saying about, like, this kind of red line where, even Sufi Muslims have to kind of say, this is kufar and this is not kufar. What you tend to find with, so even when you say Sufi, it's kind of a very general term. It's very
Yes.
difficult to know what you mean by that,
Yes.
because among Sunni Muslims, like the ones I shared, like Abdullah bin Baya and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, those guys are Orthodox Sunni Muslims, but they're also Sufi. Then there's Sufis that you see like spinning and
Yeah.
playing music and Allah, 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 and those guys are like getting almost out of Islam now. Like they're like going out of it. And then there's
Yeah.
people that like, Ibn Arabi and these people that said, and Rumi, who said things like, I am God and you are my slave. And like they've said things which are blasphemous. And they're considered blasphemous by Orthodox Muslims, but they said it. And I think even like sometimes they were killed for saying these things. but
Yeah,
but
there was a famous Sufi in India. His name was Sarmad. I forgot his other last name, but Sarmad something. Very famous. He was an Armenian Christian who converted to Islam and became a Sufi saint, and lived in Persia, and then made his permanent home in India, in Delhi, which is where he spent the rest of his life. And he was executed by Aurangzeb, who was
Mm,
a Mughal Muslim ruler of Delhi. He was executed in the town square by Aurangzeb for being an apostate, because he said that, look, my belief and where I find happiness, where I find profundity, is not solely on Allah. I can find profundity and beauty anywhere. That's what he said one day, and he proclaimed it openly, that I find profundity in Allah, I found it in Ram, I find it in Lakshman. And so he got executed for it. So yeah.
yeah, that's unfortunate for sure. But you do tend to find that Sufis do tend to like kind of bleed out of Islam and go into like very like heterodox belief, not orthodox. And so I have much more Sufi friends that are not ex-Muslim, but like Muslims would not call them Muslim. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like they're pretty
mm.
much ex-Muslim, but they don't call themselves ex-Muslim because they still believe in Allah. But they're like you said. I find a lot of them are perennialists, so they believe that all religions and all paths are true. There's one God that's like pervasive and this and that. So it definitely blends into other religious traditions, but they're still Muslim and they still some of them still get mad at me because
Yeah,
I'm saying the Quran's bad and this and that. Like you looking at the Quran in a very shallow way. You have to look at the deeper meanings,
yeah.
like the deeper meaning behind the meaning. That's what you should be looking at. I'm like, I'm just looking at the obvious meanings that
Yeah.
everybody else is looking at, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we were talking about mindfulness, and you were talking about how it's so beneficial. In India, in Indian philosophy, we say one of the pinnacles of mindfulness or yoga. When we say yoga, yoga in the West means like the poses and the exercise, but yoga in India is actually 8 other steps. So poses is only one step. There's 8 other steps of it. It's called Ashtanga yoga. And so when they say the pinnacle of yoga, the pinnacle of sort of mindfulness is Satchid Ananda, which means when you become aware of yourself, and through becoming aware of yourself, you become aware of the cosmos. And the feeling you get when you become aware of yourself is happiness, Ananda. And that is what you'll notice with people that are experienced meditators. Experienced meditators are generally happy people.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, finish, and I
No,
want to say
so
something.
yeah, so experienced meditators are generally happy people, very open-minded people, and accepting people.
I want to say something. Another profound, like mind blown moment for me when I left Islam is the fact that like there's so much scientific evidence that shows the benefits of meditation.
Right.
You don't have any of that for Islamic practice. I don't know if it's because nobody bothered to study like the Islamic namaz, but the reality is the Islamic namaz or the salah, it gets in the way of you meditating. It's not like you're reading
It's good for, I feel, like memory building, like memorizing stuff. No, because a lot of
yeah,
like Sanskrit, a lot of like Hindu priests that study the Vedas,
yeah.
that's how they remember it as well, like constant repetition.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That's a good point. But it doesn't like I have a friend, his name is Talib, that meditation helped him to see his way away from Orthodox Islam because
Interesting.
it changed his life. He was praying, he was a Muslim for 45 years,
Wow.
praying every day. Like he never missed a single prayer. He converted to Islam. He's a German guy.
Okay.
Yet when he started meditating, his life started changing. So now I sometimes get attacked. I mean, probably by not your audience, but like atheists think some atheists they can't see any benefit in this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's like scientific evidence that shows that just think about it. Nobody's saying you have to believe in
Yeah,
anything.
and we're not even talking about a religious practice here. We're talking about a spiritual practice that is not necessarily even tied to religion in any way.
Which even that they have a problem with
Yeah,
spirituality, which I think is a problem because you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
that's right.
Even in Islam, I'm sure there's some good things that we can find that like some of them predated Islam, some of them maybe Muhammad came up with, some of them maybe some of the later people came up with, like the encouragement to be like to wash yourself, to be clean, stuff like that. I mean, there's good things. Like I still wash my butt.
Yeah, you're not going to stop doing that just because you left Islam, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I really do think that's something very interesting. And now you're talking about that being able to measure. And there's been that book we were both talking about that we both read, where there were people of by Michael Pollan. It's called How to Change Your Mind. If people haven't read it, I'd recommend they check it out. That talks about how you have these universities and you have centers in these universities that are genuinely trying to scientifically study your brain under a of experienced meditators, and they're realizing the changes in brains of experienced meditators than just a normal individual. And they're also trying to like find the changes that happens to people under controlled psychedelic experiments as opposed to regular people, and they're realizing and they're finding like tangible changes that happen to people's brains after meditating or after having that controlled sort of psychedelic experience. So that's something that people are measuring now as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. And if something is measurably beneficial, I mean, you should do it. I mean, I should do it. Exercise, meditation,
Yeah.
these are good things.
Yeah, I genuinely do think so. I genuinely do think that, and I spoke to a guy who's an Iranian who was involved in the Iranian protest that happened against the government the other day, and he was telling me that there's sort of a movement towards reversion to sort of ancient Persian traditions. And again, mindfulness is like a part of it as well. And they're saying there's a lot of Persians, or there's a lot of Iranians that are practicing mindfulness, that are saying, we're trying to rediscover our Persian roots because we're Persians, we're not Arabs. So why, and stuff like that. So I think it's a good thing. I think exploring yourself in a way like this is a good thing, because if doing something makes you a happier and open-minded person, then what's wrong with it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I genuinely do think so. Okay, let's take a couple of questions. So with one of the questions that was asked to you was how much, this is again from Sona Parivraj. So she was asking that how much have you so far learned about other philosophies other than Islam? Or
So
have you at all?
so we did talk about that a bit,
Yeah.
and I like the idea that exists in Hinduism of not harming other animals, not eating. We were talking about eating meat, I think, and I actually think it's a good thing to eat less meat, to not eat meat. It's better the for the environment. It's probably better for health, but that can be debated. But for sure, it's better for the animals.
Right.
So I like this kind of philosophy, and I think we did kind of answer a lot of this
Yeah, we
in
did.
what we just talked about.
Yeah. Okay. Another question comes from this is from Mr. Reese as well. What did you personally feel about people from other religions when you were a devout Muslim?
So like I was saying, I talked about my dad. My dad was very open minded. My family in general, my extended family is very liberal. So I'm
Okay.
quite lucky that when I left Islam, like nobody's
Nobody
bothered.
bat an eye.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, my auntie was crying and said, you don't want to go to hell. You should believe in God at least. And my sister-in-law was upset, and people were upset. Like some of them were upset, but like okay, that was it.
Yeah.
Now we just back to normal, everyone's fine. And so I'm in a very liberal family. I'm a very accepting, loving family. I never had that problem. I
Mm,
didn't think any worse of anybody else. What I did think was that I need to help people to see Islam, because I thought Islam was good for the world, and I thought Islam was the best way, was the only way to be saved from Allah's wrath. So because of
right.
that, I mean, I just wanted people to convert to Islam. But I didn't think anything less of anybody else.
Right. Okay. Even when you were a devout Muslim, you did
Mhm.
not. Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah. Like
Right.
I used to wish good for everybody. I wanted people to convert to Islam,
Mm,
not because I was some Islamic superior person or whatever, but because of those two reasons. That one, I actually thought Islam was the solution to all the world's problems, which is naive and stupid, but that's what I used to believe
sure. Sure.
because I believed it was from God.
Sure.
And two is because I don't want anyone to go to hell. Nobody. So
Right.
those are the two reasons why I tried my very best to tell people about Islam. But thankfully, my sincerity led me out of Islam because if you keep having those dialogues, eventually you realize that some problems in Islam, right? And so that's how I managed to leave Islam.
That's cool. And there's another question that comes here, which is an interesting topic. In the West, people talk often about the concept of tolerance, like how important tolerance is, and we should tolerate people, and so on and so forth. And in India, there's a discussion which I find very interesting, is that they say in India that tolerance is not a complete concept. When, for example, like when I was in I lived in New Zealand for a couple of years, and in New Zealand, one of the things that I experienced, and this is me just freshly having moved out of India, went to New Zealand for a while, and one of the things that I saw there was I would every now and then run into some very devout people, and they would tell me that, of course, you're a Hindu, you're not a Christian, it's okay, we tolerate you, there's no worries. But oftentimes when I talked to them, and there was a lady, she was an older lady that I used to go to her house for tea every now and then, because she really liked me, and she's like, "Hey, Sham, come over for tea." So I'd go have tea with her every now and then. And one day she went into her room and brought out a Bible and gave it to me. And I said, thank you very much, but I think I'll be all right. But she said, "Look, I like you. You're such a nice boy, and I just don't want you to go to hell," is what she said to me.
Yeah.
And I just laughed, because she was a really nice lady. So I had no like anger or animosity towards her at all for saying that. But I just laughed to myself. And so tolerance is a concept that, okay, if I see you across the street, I'm not going to kill you. That's tolerance. And but in my heart of hearts, I'm still going to keep thinking that you're wrong. I'm
Hmm.
still going to keep thinking that you're going to burn in hell. And I'm still going to keep thinking that it is my duty as a good Christian slash Muslim slash whatever the hell you are, to convert you to my way of thinking.
Yeah.
That is tolerance.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's another concept that people in India talk about, which is mutual respect,
Hmm.
which is saying that, okay, I'm going to give your idea the time of day. I'm going to show respect to it. Okay. I'm still going to debate it if I think it's wrong, but at the very least, I'm going to show you respect, which is to say that I believe that you have the right to live the way you want to live.
Hmm.
So what do you think about that? There's a question that is often asked to me whenever I talk to like a somebody who's not a Hindu,
Hmm.
and that people always ask me that question. And do you find any value in that argument, or do you think the two of them are one and the same?
Um, I'm not sure what the difference is. I don't
So
really.
tolerance, I would say, is that basically thinking that,
Hmm.
okay, that person, I'm going to let them live their lives, but at the same time, I'm thinking that they're wrong. I'm thinking
Hmm.
that they don't deserve to live their life the way they live, and I have to change it, or I have to do something
Oh,
about it.
okay. I see.
Mutual respect is, I genuinely respect
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying. If you're saying something wrong, I'm going to
Okay,
challenge it,
I
but at
get
the
it.
same time, I am not trying to change your way of life. I'm not trying to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
destroy you or something like that.
So I think that when people are trying to change others, there's obviously a line that needs to be drawn as to, like, when I was giving dawa, what I was doing was it was totally opt in. So I would go to like a place and we would have a table, and whoever wanted to come talk to us would talk to us, and then we would give them. We weren't like handing out flyers. I mean,
Mm,
even though that can be seen as a little bit pushy, a little bit more pushy than having a table, but still, it's still opt-in. Like, you can still say, no, I don't want this, or I don't want to have this conversation. I do think that um there is definitely like a line there between, like, like we were having a discussion about eating meat, for example.
yeah.
Like, is it okay? Like, some people somebody on Twitter was telling me that nobody should be allowed to eat beef in India because of so and so reason. And the way I saw it was like, okay, that's if that's the law, that's the law. But like, I think that's coming from a religious perspective, not us. And in a secular society, everyone should have the right to choose for themselves. Like if I don't want to drink alcohol, that doesn't mean
That's
I
okay.
stop you from drinking alcohol,
Yeah.
unless, of course, there's always a line to be drawn, because let's say we get to the point where, as a society, we decide that alcohol is so bad that we should ban it. Now, is there anything wrong with that? I don't think there's nothing wrong with that,
Sure.
but it's always going to be a debate, right? And there needs to be some sort of discussion. But the challenge is when, especially with Islamic law, a lot of the laws are kind of like very draconian, and like people think they need to push on everyone else. Like women have to wear this certain dress code, men cannot do this and that. You cannot wear gold. You have to eat halal meat. Like all of these things become like enforced as a law, which is, I think, unfortunate and difficult, right? To kind of live under someone else's laws that you might not even believe in, like Christian. But in some countries, for example, in Egypt, like Christians can buy alcohol. So,
Mm.
and I've heard in some countries there's different laws for Muslims and non-Muslims, which is kind of
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason I mentioned the mutual respect
Yeah.
aspect as well is because, like, for instance, in the US, this is a very popular concept, particularly among conservatives, of tolerance. That
Hmm.
the US is a tolerant society and so on. And I think that's a great thing. I genuinely do think that's a great thing. But the problem that happens is that the same conservatives that say that the US is such a tolerant society pour billions upon billions of dollars into conversion activities in Eastern countries. They'll send
Yeah.
out. So in India last year, 2017, sorry, 2017, so a year ago, three of the top four non-governmental organizations that received the most amount of government funding were Christian evangelical missionary organizations.
Wow.
So you have these conservatives that at the one point are saying that tolerance is important, but on the other hand, turn around and pump billions of dollars. And all these missionary organizations do is, more often than not, they target the sort of poor and illiterate people. They say, "Oh, we're going to give you money if you accept Jesus. Oh, we're going to help you out with this and this if you accept Jesus." And there was this crazy example where in 2004, when the tsunami happened in India, where so many people died, missionary organizations descended upon Tamil Nadu in India, and they said, "We're going to give you relief. We're going to give you relief. We're going to give you food, blankets, and all that. But first, accept Jesus." And which made huge headlines in India, and people were rightly outraged. Like, this is not a charity anymore. Now you're conducting a business. This is a
Yeah.
business transaction.
Yeah.
You can't call this a charity legally
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. That's
So
unfortunate.
that's
Yeah.
where the concept of sort of tolerance
Okay.
versus mutual respect comes in.
I
That's what I
I
was.
I almost feel like that's not tolerance, and I feel like
Yeah,
that's a sham of tolerance, because
yeah,
what that's doing is, I don't see how people can claim to be tolerant and also behave in that way, because although, like I said, it is fair game to spend your money and to promote your religious worldview, as
sure.
long as you let other people do the same. That is tolerance. But at the same time, a lot of those.
And one more point quickly.
Mhm.
Sorry, Abdullah, I'll let you complete.
Yep.
But one more point is that's why the reason I was giving you the example of India in particular, because in
Okay.
India in particular, and I think this happens in Nepal. This happened in with the Yazidis when they were being targeted by ISIS as well. But what happens is, oftentimes these conversions or attempted conversions by these missionary organizations happen in dubious ways. It's not
Mm.
as simple as, "Hey, here's the word of the Bible. Do
Oh,
you
okay.
like it? Oh, you do like it. Great.
Yeah.
Come over to our side." It's not.
Okay.
It's rarely that it happens like that. It
Yeah. Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you want some money? Here,
Yeah.
accept Jesus. You want some food? Accept Jesus." Or they often say that they target the more illiterate part of the
Mhm.
society, where they say that the Bible is basically just another Veda, dude. That's what it is. No, 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 I'm not lying to you. It's the
Yeah.
truth. So often it happens in fraudulent ways, against
Yeah.
which India is now creating laws that, like,
Okay.
propagating your religion is fine, but fraudulent propagation isn't.
Ah, okay, okay. Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
important distinction to make. And yeah, that's definitely unethical to do that. And I do think that a lot of what people claim to be tolerance is not actually tolerance. Like a lot of these conservative people are also against like abortions, they're
Yes.
also against the even like they so there was so George W. Bush at his time, like the government, because of the religious like interference into the government, they insisted that a lot of the money that was supposed to be used to give out condoms in Africa,
Yeah.
they were instead teaching about abstinence, which actually caused so many people to die because they got AIDS, because that doesn't work. That's not effective, right? Rather than giving them actual things that can help them, they were coming at it from a religious angle, and like, and so that I do think that a lot of times religion can poison, the people's decision making in a way that they would make a decision in a way that is not the most optimal way because of this religious dogma.
Yeah, in US it's interesting because in France, France has like nowhere near the number of unplanned pregnancies that the United States has. In France, it's very low.
Yeah,
But the reason is because in a lot of schools in the US, they teach abstinence,
yeah,
whereas in France, they straight up teach you about contraception.
yeah,
Look,
exactly,
I know what your kids are going to do. Just know what you need to be safe. That's what they teach you, and I think
exactly.
that's a more efficient way of going about it.
Yeah, and I mean, there is an argument to be made that if you want to teach that, premarital sex is bad or whatever, you can teach that, but then
Yes,
don't stop doing the other thing too, like
yes,
teaching them about STIs and, safe sex and all that, because that's important too. And the problem happens especially when you forget about that and you only do one,
yeah.
right? And to be honest, like, it's a fine line to be drawn, like schools teaching morality, right? You know what I mean? Especially
That's right.
religious morality. Now, obviously, secular morality, which is that everyone has, universal human rights. There's nothing wrong with teaching that. Nobody would disagree with that. But when you get into like a religious thing, then it becomes problematic, especially in a mixed society of like Christians, Muslims, Hindus. Everybody's has their own perspectives. Like right now in UK, there's this big kind of controversy going on in, I think, Birmingham, because a lot of Muslims in Muslim majority school, probably they're against teaching about LGBT and homosexuality and all that.
Oh
And so
wow,
they're like,
I didn't know that.
there's a huge thing going on there where
Wow.
some ex-Muslims are kind of trying to raise awareness that not just ex-Muslims but even non-Muslims are saying like, how are we allowing this? How are we tolerating people to say, I'm going to take my kids out of school? Like, they're not teaching your kids to be gay. They're just teaching them this is natural. Variety happens,
Yeah.
among 5% of the population. Usually 5 to 10% will be gay. That's just how they are. I mean, that's it. So like, they let them live their lives. We're not saying anything like you have to be gay. I mean, come on. It's like ridiculous. But yeah, they see it in like almost like, oh, we can't teach our kids this.
Yeah. That's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. And sometimes I'm one of those people who sometimes agrees with like liberal arguments, sometimes I agree with conservative arguments. So because I feel like 90% of people on the planet are like that,
Hmm.
that they don't just fall in one category,
Yeah.
even though social media would have us believe that there's only one way to think about things. But sometimes I listen to conservatives speak and they say, oh, liberals are destroying the country and so on and so forth. And in some instances, they might have a point, but I
Hmm.
genuinely believe so much that certain amount of liberalism is so important in a society, because if not for them, we would not be pushing for LGBT rights, we would not be pushing for abortion rights and so on and so forth. And so when people make the case that liberalism is cancer, is going to destroy the world, I get your sentiment, but it's important in every society. I
Yeah.
genuinely feel so.
Hmm.
At least a certain amount is.
Yeah, I agree.
you know yeah. And okay, so do I have any more questions? We did have a lot of questions, but what I tried to do is I tried to involve the questions in our discussion. So sort of
Yeah.
some of the questions, I brought it up. So how long have you been? One of the questions comes that this you've already answered. The question was like, does uh, does Abdullah know about meditation? Of
Yep.
course you do. How
Mhm.
long have you been doing it for?
So I've been doing it on and off, here and there. I tend to find when I'm in trouble, then I start doing it. So if I'm getting frustrated or
Or
upset about
anxious?
something,
Yeah.
then I'm like, okay, I need to bring this back into my life. I really do believe that it's something I should do every day, but I haven't been doing it every day. But I would love to do that. I love to bring it back into my life. It's a
Awesome.
goal of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I've been, it's hard, particularly when you're getting started. Like
Yeah.
and I've been doing it for like kind of on and off for about a year,
Yeah.
and it's still hard for me to be able to do it every day, because sometimes I'm just like, even though sometimes if I have 10 minutes to spare,
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll do this. You know?
Yeah, there's a certain point when you do it, when you actually
Yeah.
start to feel the benefit. It happened to me just once,
Mm.
where I actually meditated for like, I think, 20 minutes, and I was like, the last 5 minutes felt like an hour. It was felt so long, and but I just did it because I had a timer, right? And when I finally finished it, I felt like almost like after you feel after you have weed, like this kind of like mellow. I was like, oh my
Yeah,
god, this feels so good. This is like without any drugs. I felt like
yeah, I know.
wow, but that only happened once so far. So it's definitely requires some effort.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, yeah, I think it's such a beneficial thing, and I would really recommend people to give it a try because it's helped me like immensely, and I don't even do it that often. So, it's really helped me immensely. All right, you know, I think our discussion today has been so encouraging for me because it's very cool to see people that are out there not with an agenda but genuinely exploring, but genuinely trying to explore that the world is not just this one way that that people will have you believe. The world is diverse, and so are people's minds, so are ideologies, and so is reality. We live in a very diverse world with diverse people, diverse ideas, and I think it's important for us to try and explore them. Whenever we try and tell people that the world's this way or that way and that is it, it always leads to problems, and it often, I feel like, stems from a political ideology rather than a genuine spiritual search. And that is what I feel like has happened with Islam and Christianity to an extent, that it's been so influenced. Politics is so intrinsically mixed in that it's hard to ignore. And when you put in political considerations, then it just muddles the whole search of spirituality. So I really did enjoy talking to you today, Abdullah. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for doing this, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I'll be publishing this episode soon so everybody can hear it. Guys, if you want to go ahead and follow Abdullah, please make sure you do, because I learned a lot from talking to him today. Go ahead and make sure you follow his YouTube channel. It's provided in the link down below in the description. I believe your Twitter is available there as well. If it's not, I'll provide it. So again, Abdullah, I'll leave you with the final word before we wrap up, if you have anything to add.
No, it's just what you said is true that I think the world is I actually do believe the world is becoming a better place. I do think that there is a huge amount of ex-Muslims in the closet. Like personally, I know like I think 9 out of 10 of the people I know are in the closet. I don't mean I only know 10 people. I mean for every like I know like so many people that are in the closet and they still call themselves Muslims, but
Mm,
they don't believe anymore. And why is this a good thing? Because I do think that Islam places a burden on people's lives that actually is not worth what the cost is, because it's all weighed on an imaginary afterlife that's never going to come. So if we can help people to get their lives back, I mean, I do have an agenda, which is to help people to find out that Islam is not true. And if they choose to remain Muslims, that by all means, I'm very
that's fine.
happy. Whether you believe or don't believe, I don't really, that's not a problem to me. But I do believe that secularism and democracy is the best way for going forward, that everyone has their own rights, and as long as your rights don't trample on my rights, we'll be fine. You can practice your religion, you can wear your hijab, you can pray 5 times a day. You should not be disrespected for your belief, for basically being a Muslim or being a Hindu or whatever you are. You should not be treated differently, or like threatened or discriminated against, whether that or whether you're gay or straight or whatever color you are. This is what I believe, and I think we're actually going in a very good direction, and I hope it continues that way. And I do appreciate the chat. It's been great. We talked about a lot of different things,
Yeah.
and no, it was awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely, man, and I'd love to do it again soon at some point. It's fun discussing these things with open-minded people. So yeah, I'd love to be able to do this again at some point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, guys. Thanks again very much for watching today's episode. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe if you like the Sham Sharma Show. I'll see you guys again soon. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you guys later.